Welcome to Beyond the Closing Table. I'm Michael Martin, and we're here to discuss strategies, stories, and successes, as well as failures with top producing real estate agents, mortgage lenders, and entrepreneurs. I'm here with my guest and friend, Brian Pate. Brian Pate and I have known each other for about 10 years or so. And Brian Pate is a well-known speaker, specifically an educator for real estate agents, mostly, I believe, in North Carolina, right?
That's correct.
And has been a real estate agent for a long time. A really long time. So, Brian, tell me.
Need to emphasize really long time quite so much, but thank you.
Tell me a little bit about, I know you grew up in the Myrtle Beach area, although you said you were born in Florida.
I did. Born in Tallahassee, Florida, so go Seminoles.
How's that team doing this year?
They're not. We're not going to discuss that. Wasn't that in my contract?
You wore the shirts.
Look, I am loyal to a fault. I remember sitting through 0-11 and 1-10 seasons with my daddy with season tickets in 1974 and 75 before Bobby Bowden was hired.
Yeah.
So I bleed garnet and gold with my family.
So I think I am a Redskins / Commander fan.
Yes.
It's tough for me to say that,
yes.
But this year's, of course, our first year we've had some potential.
I lost money on that game last weekend. They got beat by the Cowboys.
Oh my God, that was brutal.
That was bad.
Yeah, that was really brutal.
So
I was saying to you earlier, you confuse me when I see you on Facebook because you wear so many different colors of different teams. So to give us a little bit of history of all these teams that you like.
So my mother and father went to school at Florida State University. They were both in the marching band, which is the world-renowned Florida State University Marching Chiefs. And they liked the band so much that they formed the alumni band. So they and another couple were the founders of it. And this past weekend for homecoming, that alumni band marched 240 members.
Wow.
So the first year they did it, I think they had about 30 to 35 members, and my dad was the drum major and carried a plunger because they couldn't find a scepter for the drum major to use. So
that's hilarious.
It has grown significantly since then. And then a lot of my family has gone to school at the University of Oklahoma, the Gaylord Business School and the journalism school out there. I come from 5 generations of newspapers, so I grew up with ink on my fingers.
Yeah, your dad was...
My dad was a newspaper publisher for, I think,
in Myrtle Beach, right?
He was the publisher at the Myrtle Beach Sun News.
Sun News, that's right.
And then the Tallahassee Democrat when they moved back to Tallahassee. They've retired to Florida at this point. And like most little boys, my dad is my hero. But I grew up learning the newspaper business. A lot of my advertising techniques are things that we talked about when I was 15, 16 years old, when I was running my very first business. So
wow.
It's all there. But grew up in Myrtle Beach, graduated from Socastee High School down there. Go Braves! So Seminoles to Braves. And then I moved here to Raleigh, North Carolina, August 20th of 1989.
Okay.
And then I got my real estate license in 1993 and started teaching real estate in 1994. So the joke with one of my friends, Peter Keim, always says that I sold Fred and Wilma Flintstone their first house. So for those of you under the age of 30, that was an old cartoon, and you can Google it and go watch reruns on Nickelodeon or something.
Meet the Flintstones.
Meet the Flintstones.
That's right.
Yes.
Very, very good. So you got into teaching real estate right after you started.
I did. So I've
always heard that if you can't sell, you should teach.
Yeah. Well, then that was the case back then. I remember my first transaction, 7208 Bramblewood Drive in Valley Estates here in Raleigh, over near the intersection of Lynn Road and Creedmoor Road. As a matter of fact, we almost drove by it yesterday. We were on the way to dinner with some friends. But John and Karen Stevenson were my first client. That was the day I got out of training. I finished training at 12 noon. We had a congratulatory luncheon till 1 o'clock. I went in and started doing phone duty, which at the time was a bank of phones with the white blinking lights, for those of you who remember the old office phones. And they called in at about 5:15. And the girl that had been training me was a lady named Joe Steemock. Patience of Job, because I was a 24-year-old know-it-all. I was obnoxious, and I can admit it today.
One thing has changed.
One thing has changed, yes. But I remember the call came in, and I went through the process of doing the question to answer a question like they trained us back in those days. And I said, would you be interested in seeing the house? And he said, yes. And I didn't know what to do. So I screamed down the hallway, hey, Joe, they want to see it. What do I do? She says, show it to them. I'm like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny how when you start out, you know, when you start, you're a sponge. And there's about a 3 to 5 year process of just learning and learning and learning. And then you get a little cocky between your 5th and your 8th year, and something knocks you back to get you back down to level again. And that's when you really start producing, if you can last in the business that long. So,
you know, it's interesting.
Part of the fun.
You're bringing up your first client. And I think you always kind of forget, you remember your first. You don't ever forget your first, right?
Yes.
And so my first client was Joe. I'm sorry, it was Joe. Gosh, now I forgot as I said that. It was Joe and Karen White.
Okay.
And I will never forget. Now, it's interesting how things come full circle, right? So here we are in 2024, the end of 2024. Interest rates are around 7%.
Mm-hmm.
When I started in January of 2022, I didn't close the loan my first month. Obviously, there's a little bit of leeway right there. But I did close the loan my second month, which was first full month in February, which was the Whites. And they were a lead that somehow calling. I worked for, you remember CCB, Central Carolina Bank, which became SunTrust and then Truist. You know, I had no idea how to call on real estate agents at the time. Fortunately, the phones were ringing because the year before rates were at 8%. The year before that, they were at 9%.
Yep.
So we had a fair amount of refinances. I happened to get a VA purchase loan as my first deal.
Right.
Which, you know, it's like, what the heck? You know, a VA is a pretty complicated first loan to get.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, I had a great team around me, but I think I locked that loan in at 7 1/8, right, which is almost exactly where rates are right now.
Yep.
Rates were almost never that high throughout the period of time until the last year or so.
Yeah.
They stayed pretty darn low for a long time. But you'll never forget the first client, and I just remember how grateful I was to have them as a client, right? Probably the same way you felt.
Yep.
But also, the fact that you just got to learn so much and then start this process, right?
Absolutely.
I never had a month where I closed less than one loan after that month.
Nice.
Which was fun. But
yeah, they were my first transaction. So I finished training probably August 20th, August 25th, somewhere in that ballpark. And that house closed in September. And I was like, well, this is easy. All I got to do is sit here and stuff comes to me. It was March of the following year before I closed another house. So, you know, I've always told people, you don't get to try the real estate business. The real estate business tries you.
yeah.
And it's the truth. But you know what? It's the greatest business in the world. We get to help people with what is often the single largest investment they make in their entire lives.
Yep.
And we get to guide them, and some take that advice and some don't. And you have to learn to balance that. And, you know, I think the reputation of realtors right now is kind of down. A recent Gallup poll said that only 8% of people in the U.S. trust realtors.
Wow.
So that means when you walk in a room and 92%, if there are 100 people there, 92 of them don't trust you. That's kind of a tough position to be in. Hopefully they're not the ones that call for help. But you know, it's with all of the changes that are going on in the business, and you know, this business changes every few years. This is just the latest iteration of the changes that we deal with.
Yeah. I'd say some of it changes. I mean, there's parts of it changing constantly, right?
Oh, no question. No question.
So that's when you got started. You said 89, is that right?
I moved here in 89. I started in 93.
Okay.
Got licensed in 93, yep.
And then you started training and teaching shortly thereafter. Have you been teaching the whole time since then?
So, yes. I really, the reason they hired me as an instructor was I can't say in my past life, because I was one of those dual career real estate agents for a long time. I was a nightclub, radio, and wedding DJ.
I'm glad this came up.
So I had been DJing. I started DJing when I was 14 years old. And my dad helped me establish my first business, Mobile Music Unlimited, in Myrtle Beach. And I played every middle school party and every high school dance throughout the high school days, and then got a job at a nightclub in Myrtle Beach called Studebakers, and they played 50s, 60s, and beach music. So, which I grew up in my family when I was growing
like
up.
down in Myrtle Beach.
Yeah,
right?
it was on corner of 21st Avenue North and Kings Highway, right across from the Camelot movie theater. For those that have been around a while, but when I was young, we didn't have a television because we couldn't afford it. So Dad would come home every Tuesday was when the record labels would bring the new music into the stores, and Dad would come home with a couple of albums. And so I grew up listening to everything from the Eagles, Hotel California, to Ferrante and Teicher, and the Eastern Brass Quintet. Of course, with parents that were in the band, there was a lot of orchestral music, and we would literally sit there and play cards. We would play checkers. Dad and I started playing backgammon together, and we would literally play for 2 or 3 hours most nights because we didn't have a television to watch.
And just listen to music.
And we would just listen to music.
Wow.
And, then we were finally able to afford a television, and Dad and I, that's where the sports love came in. I started playing baseball when I was 6 years old in Miami, Florida, in the Pinto League down there, and played for a team that was sponsored by Bremer's Pest Control. And we have a picture of me. I was playing shortstop, and my grandfather took a photograph of me picking my underwear out of my butt on the field, and so that's my best memory there. But there was also a game that season where one of the umpires didn't show up, so my dad volunteered to be the umpire, and I was running to second base, and my dad was the umpire at second base, and he called me out. And we have argued for 47 years now as to whether I was safe or out at this point.
Wow, that's crazy.
So still great memories though. But yeah, that was the DJing and the public speaking came now I was a very shy kid. I got my first DJ job at Sports World roller skating rink because all the cute girls went up to the DJ booth to talk to the DJ. So I didn't have the guts to go up to somebody.
Yeah.
And once I got I transferred from a private school to a public school in Myrtle Beach for my junior and senior year of high school, and that was where the transformation came to where I became more outgoing and was a lot more comfortable in my own skin. I could be me.
Okay.
I was uncomfortable at the private school because it was a lot of families with a lot more money than we ever
Sure.
thought about having, and it was not a good fit for me, even though I was there for 5 years.
Interesting. You felt comfortable with this being the DJ. They gave you opportunity for people to come up to you. Mm-hmm. Now, in the real estate world, you've got to go out and see people. So obviously, you've overcome this over time.
Yeah. So the best thing about the DJ business is that it gave me the opportunity to talk to people. When the bride and groom for a wedding calls you a year in advance of their wedding and books you to be their DJ, and you say, by the way, do you have an interest in buying a home? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. I probably sold 3 to 4 homes a year because of that business.
That's awesome.
So it gave me young people that were buying their first home. They'd be, back in those days, people actually got married in their early 20s. Today, a lot of people are waiting until their mid 30s to get married, and we're seeing those in the statistical data, the transactions. But they would work with me on both sides of it. So I had a great relationship. I was at their wedding, so I had photographs with them, and I got to know their parents and their families. And, I was just naturally very good at speaking to people, and I had the advantage that I had the microphone in my hand. So
Sure.
everybody that was important to me they would remember my name by the end of the event.
So I'm curious how that kind of took off in your real estate career. So that's kind of how you started, right? But then what made you kind of say, this is what I'm doing full time? And honestly, I'd love to know maybe even some of the challenges that you had along the way, because I'm sure you had some if you were in business.
So I will tell you that my first broker in charge was a guy named Ross Rudy, and Ross was perfect for me. He pushed me. I remember sitting in my office at my desk. We had shared offices back then, so it was 2 people to an office space. We didn't have the bullpens like we have today. And I remember sitting there one day, and I had my face buried in my hands like this, staring at the phone. And Ross walked by. He said, "What's the matter?" I said, It's just not working. He says, what's the matter? I said, the phone's not ringing. He looks at me and says, you do realize it makes outgoing calls. And something so simple, sometimes when you live in your own house, you don't notice what's wrong with it. And it was the same way with the business. And so I had to get a perspective on it. And by not only teaching regulatory courses on how to get your license, and there was no post-licensing back in the 90s. Everything was just, here's the license, go for it. And you had to pass the test to upgrade the license. Well, by watching what other people were doing wrong, I was able to get better quicker, and hearing all the training. And I was a sponge. I was going to North Carolina Real Estate Educators Conferences, which I've now been president of, be president for the third time next year. But I learned a ton from very good instructors. And so at the time, in the late 90s, there was a frustration for Ross that I was DJing and selling real estate, and everybody, because
you weren't focused on
my name was on the radio every week. I was the DJ at the Long Branch for 4 years, from 1995 to 1999, and so they advertised my name because at that point I'd been all over the world DJing and playing shows anywhere and everywhere. So they had my name out there. Well, what he didn't realize was that name recognition was just as good from that standpoint because of the number of people from the Long Branch I did business with.
Sure.
And he and I got into a little bit of a tiff at one point. And again, because I was a DJ and I thought I was a star, head got out of control. And I walked away and went to another company for a couple of years and ended up going back eventually and actually managing for Fonville Morrissey in the 2000s. But I didn't make the full-time switch to just real estate until 2015.
Okay.
So it's only been the last 10 years, really, that I have been focused on that. And we built...
I remember there was a big deal on social media when you sold your equipment.
Yes.
Was that 2018 or something?
2014 was when we signed all the paperwork, and I played my last show in 2015. But yeah, we had been ranked 2011, 12, and 13, we had been ranked the #1 wedding DJ company in the entire United States. We had DJs all over the place. I was very fortunate to find fantastic people that had a lot of talent, and my job was just to be their booking agent.
Wow.
And we just supported. It's so much easier for someone else to brag about you, and of course that's what we strive for in our business. We want that third-party endorsement, and as their agent, I was able to be that. And I could match up personalities. So the combination, putting the right DJ with the right couple was huge.
Do you miss that business now?
I miss the performance. As a matter of fact, I've been talking with my wife. I've been looking at actually buying the equipment again so that I could play around at the house and still do some beat mixing. I still have my Wax DJ website. I still have a couple of mixes that I did years ago that are still up there that still get downloads.
Wow.
And so I think there's been about 150,000 downloads of those two mixes just because they're very old school.
Wow.
It was literally 2 turntables and a mixer. It wasn't all the mashups and everything and the technology that the kids are using these days. But that opened my eyes to running a business, and it wasn't until I got appointed elected to the board of directors of the Wake Forest Chamber of Commerce. Met a guy named Jerry Mitchell, and Jerry was a huge influence for me. He taught me how to run a business. I remember the very first meeting, the chair of the board said, "We're going to look at the P&L now." And I leaned over to Jerry and said, "What's P&L stand for?" That's how bad I was. And he took me under
That's profit and loss for you guys, just to make sure.
That's correct for those of you. And but Jerry took the time to sit down and talk with me, and he says, "Let me see your checkbook." And he literally spent about 2 hours with me one day at the Forks Cafeteria in downtown Wake Forest. We were literally the only 2 people there. And he went through all of the numbers, and he says, "This is what your net is." And that opened my eyes to a whole different ball game.
Okay, this is actually a pretty. You and I talked about a book that you really like. And I think it's kind of a good segue into that. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it, or at least your thoughts on it. So there was a book I remember you telling me about it. Is it Pay Yourself First or
Profit First?
Profit First. That's
Profit
right.
First by Mike Malkowitz. Yeah, I read the book. I want to say it was around 2019.
Yeah.
And my dad,
I was going to say 5 years ago.
again, to my dad's credit, my dad beat it into my brain. You pay yourself first. The first 20% of your check goes into an account for you for savings, whether it's retirement, wherever, but you have to save 20% because you invest that 20% and it outsaves inflation in most cases, and it outpaces the inflation in its growth. Malkowitz talks about starting with 1%, and that's the biggest problem that anybody has to saving is starting. And when at that level of my business at the time, when I was first reading the book, I had a team of 15 people. We were selling $40-50 million a year worth of real estate. The money coming into the team was probably in the ballpark of $1.4 million a year, somewhere in that range. And I was literally putting back 1% of everything into an account. And I realized that at the end of that year, I was able to pay off my car. And so that was the first time I had been debt-free except for my house in my entire life.
Wow.
Since probably I was 17.
And what year was this?
2000 is either 18 or 19.
Okay.
And when you look at it, being debt free is a position that that enables you to say no to things. You don't feel like you have to chase your tail. And unfortunately, a lot of real estate agents, they get that check. And by the way, they put the house under contract. It doesn't close for 40 days, but they've mentally already spent the whole dadgum check before it even closes.
Yeah.
What happens when it falls through? And when you look at the statistical data, 69.2% of real estate agents in the United States this year have sold 0, 1, or 2 houses.
62%.
69.2.
69.2.
So
And you said
30% of
one or less.
30% of the agents in this country, only 30% have sold 3 houses or more.
Okay.
And in our triangle MLS, if you sold more than 10 houses, you're in the top 20%.
Yeah.
Easily.
It's interesting. We see these different stats, and you wonder, like, people are in the top 500 or whatever, and how many houses they actually sell to be in that group. And it's an honor, because it's better to not be in the top 500, but at the same time, what are these real numbers?
But, when you look at it, though, that gross number means nothing.
Sure.
What's the net? What am I taking home?
That's a great point. One of the challenges, so I never got, I was never taught finance from my parents. It's interesting, you don't always have, my brother knew it. Like, he still has the first penny he ever made, I think, right? Yep. And I spent every dime always growing up, right? So I was always borrowing from him or from my dad or whatever, right? Yep. And so when I finally got a career and started making a little bit of money, it wasn't a lot of money, but making a little bit of money, I love to spend. So, I was generally always chasing a credit card to pay off.
Yep.
I fortunately did pretty well when I got in the mortgage business and did, the first 4 years, made more money every single year, got rid of the debt I had outside of a car and a mortgage.
Yep.
And it felt great, right? And then 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12 came, and, I had 401k saved up. We utilized, unfortunately, for my poor wife, who did not have a good money manager at the house at the time, we lost all of our savings at that point, and then we're just living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck, and $50,000, $70,000 of credit card debt, right?
Yep.
And I remember that weight, right, that was constantly on my back. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to get
carrying a
over
refrigerator
this?
on your back?
Literally,
when you have the debt.
right?
Yeah.
And then 2000, honestly, interesting enough, is around the time I met you, 2014, is when I got into a coaching program. I've talked about it before, the core. And I thought I was pretty successful because I made a lot of money, but I didn't have a lot of money in the bank.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had a little bit of equity in some houses, but this coaching company taught me how to, first of all, make more money, but also to get rid of my debt.
Yeah.
And then obviously save money, right? And there's this new thing. I don't know if you've seen that Saturday Night Live. I always put it about once or twice a year. I throw it on the YouTube skit on Facebook. It's, where's this saved money? They talk about this thing. The point I'm making is, people, you have to understand first to quit the bleeding, stop the bleeding, right?
Sure.
I see finances every single day. I'm looking at credit reports, income, assets, and the first thing is you got to stop the bleeding
Right.
somehow. And then at some point, then you've got to figure out how to either make more money. Like I talk about the Dave Ramsey stuff. I taught those classes in church for a while. I'm not a huge Ramsey fan, but the debt snowball I think is a great way to get rid of your debt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at the end of the day, the point is that I'm making with all this is like you've got to stop and then take over and then just go forward.
Yes.
Specifically, go forward with making better decisions each day. So those are some of the failures I've had with this. But you've spoken about your transition to change, and you read that book and you said that helped you with specifically like understanding how to put more money away. And you said even though your dad taught you that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of the reason I went to Keller Williams, so when I left Fonville Morrissey in 2012 and went to Keller Williams, I wanted to surround myself with top producing agents to learn what they were doing. And I realized that financially I was in better shape than most of them because I was a saver. But there were things that I learned about operating the business that did exactly what you're talking about, enabled me to make more money.
Okay.
That was the first time I ever hired an assistant. And my first assistant hire was a home run because her name was Logan Heitzman. She was fantastic. She created most of the systems at the Pate Realty Group when we were at our peak.
Sure.
And she created the basics of our company. She created the working operations, if you will. And that was a huge benefit to me because it was a place where I was weak. She was licensed, so she could pick up the phone and call and say, "Hey, we need to get this appointment, this inspection scheduled, or we need to do this, do that." She would literally put a list of my to-do list every day on my desk when I walked in the door. We were a great combination. It didn't end very well because I didn't handle it very well at the end. But again, we grow. But what I realized was our team was doing, like I said, between $1 million and $1.4 million for about 4 years straight. Had some fantastic agents. Chris Barr, who's now a superstar in the industry here. Marcia Smith, another superstar in the industry here in the area. Both of them started on my team. We had a guy named Willie Coronado who was bilingual, spoke Spanish. He was from Fayetteville. He moved up here. He's now moved back to Fayetteville and is running his own family real estate company. So the legacy there, that people learned enough from me that they, hopefully they learned something that they still use. Sure. Or that was able to help them in that process. But when I sat down and did the numbers, my net was only 165, 170 a year. And I was like, this is not right. I'm working 70 hours a week. I'm missing weekends with my children because I'm doing 4 listing presentations on a Saturday and 2 on a Sunday, and I'm at the office at 7 a.m. after dropping the kids at school, and I don't get home until 8 o'clock because I got this and this and this going on. And it really cost me my relationship with my kids, to be quite honest with you. And Shannon and Cassidy are the ones that suffered from that. But what I finally realized so Chris left in January of 2019, and that was when I said, I'm going to let attrition eliminate my team. And I chose not to replace him. And then we lost one of our administrative assistants, and it got to the point where it was me, Logan, and Donna. And I'm totally blank on Donna's name. I'm so sorry. But it was just the 3 of us, and my net went up because I was involved in the transactions and I wasn't having to train everybody else and worry about what they were doing. I was spending almost 60% of my time working on the business rather than working in the business. And of course, when you're doing that and you're paying, a 50-50 split to the agents that are on your team, you're getting the full lead, but you're only making half the money. And so today I net more, even though I only sell 15 to 20 houses a year on average for the last couple of years, I net more money now than I did back then. And it's not just because prices have gone up. Obviously, we've seen a 64% increase in home values here in the Triangle market. But what I'm doing is I'm netting more and I'm spending less.
Sure.
And over the years, I've had some guidance.
And you're not having to overwork either.
Yeah, I mean, I work maybe 25 hours a week. I have the best life. The good Lord has blessed me. I am a lucky man. I am married to a woman now that is just as much of a sports fanatic as me. We've been to 83 baseball games in person this year. You know, we're talking about going to the Daytona 500 next year. We'll figure out where Carolina plays a bowl game. Obviously, we won't go to a Florida State bowl game this year, but when all of that is in line with each other, it's a completely different life. And most people are so busy on the treadmill of life running, they forget to slow it down. And you don't have to, if you spend an hour a day with intense focus, you can make $150,000 a year in this business.
An hour a day.
An hour a day, 5 days a week. And the only other thing I do is I host open houses because I use my open houses to get sellers too.
To get sellers, not buyers.
We market. We do a VIP open house program that I teach, where we send invitations to everybody. The open house starts at 12 and runs from 12 to 2. By the way, open houses should never be more than 2 hours. That way you can do one from 9 to 11, one from 12 to 2, and one from 3 to 5, and you can have an 8-hour day. And you accomplish three different properties. But the half an hour before they open, you invite the neighbors.
1 hour per day a minute ago.
Well, yeah, but when you average it out, that's
Got it.
8 hours. But that's not the lead generation.
Okay,
point.
you're talking about 1 hour
I'm talking
lead
about
generation.
1 hour focused lead gen
Got it.
to
Okay.
communicate
That
with your
makes sense.
database, and you're good. The rest of it is just the rest of this business is reactionary.
Sure.
Now you can prep and you can prepare your clients for the worst, but until the inspection report comes in and it's 87 pages long and the summary is 30 pages of that, you don't really have control over it.
That's right.
So, but that's what has made a huge difference for me is I have a focused intensity for 1 hour a day, and that's my drive. And
For your lead generation
for
specifically.
all of my lead generation. And
What do you do in that focused hour?
I communicate with the clients. I first of all, I touch every file every day. I'm going to communicate with them via email, via phone call, via text. Somehow, everybody that I'm working with every day, I'm going to communicate with them, or I'm going to do something for them and explain to them what I've done. I think that's part of the problem. A lot of people don't realize what all we do in the background. There are a lot of agents.
Well, if you don't communicate, they have no idea.
Correct. And there are a lot of agents, let's face it, that do the 3 Ps in the business. They put a sign in the front yard, they put it in MLS, and they pray that sucker sells. And what they forget is there's a 4th P to that, and that's prospecting for potential buyers. And so you want to do that. You want to communicate with the other agents that have sold property in the area. You want to put it out on social media. You want to place your advertising. You want to get that location, that geo fence around Waze, so when people get within a 3-mile radius, your ad appears on Waze or Google Maps, and they can hit the button and go straight drive by, find out all the information on the house. You got to do those YouTube videos. I mean, when I go into a listing presentation and I sit down, I have a 26-slide PowerPoint presentation that walks everybody through what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and why we're going to do it, so the sellers got buy-in. And then they see the YouTube channel. They see 10,000 people on Facebook following. They see 2,000, 2,400, whatever it is, on Instagram, and 300 subscribers on YouTube. They don't realize that if I can get 50 views of your home on the YouTube channel, because that's where people go. The flyer box in the front yard is gone.
Yeah.
They drive up to the house, they Google it. That video, because it's on YouTube, that's the first thing listed. And so they watch the video. I've just had a showing.
That's correct.
And the internet has replaced the first showing. And so the clients have to understand that. When I walk in with that and the other agent walks in with 3 pieces of paper, says, here's the 3 closest comps you've got, well, what are you going to do to market it? If they go in behind me, they're done.
Yeah.
If I go in last, it's game over.
Sure.
So I think that a lot of agents don't realize how much work goes into practicing the listing presentation, practicing the buyer consult, being able to express, especially now, you have to be able to quantify your value to people in about 30 to 45 seconds, because with the new rules of the NAR settlement and the North Carolina Real Estate Commission rules, we've got to have a written buyer's agency agreement before we walk in the door. That's like sitting down for dinner, and as you pull the chair out for the woman, asking her to marry you before you even sit down for
So
dinner.
we've been now a few months into this. What changes have you felt in your business specifically based on those NAR rulings?
Well, my fees have gone up to my sellers, unfortunately, and that's because I get unrepresented buyers calling me that want to see the house. So it takes more time. I've got to go out and show the property where normally I wouldn't have had to do that. I still recommend that they get a buyer's agent because I think it's in their best interest to do so. Are the sellers paying it? Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some are paying lower amounts. So you're seeing different amounts with that and the way it's working. From a standpoint of the business, it's really, and this is the simplest form I can give you. For a real estate agent today, it's no different than working with a for sale by owner. You pick up the phone and you call and you say, are you willing to pay a buyer's agent compensation? If they're not, you tell the buyers and you tell your buyers, you're going to have to pay me on this one. Do you want to go look at it or not? Because I can't make that decision. If I make that decision, say, well, they're not paying, so I'm not showing it to you, that's an antitrust violation. Sure. I can lose my license. I can go to jail. I mean, there's a lot of layers of both state and federal wrongdoing in that, plus the violation of the code of ethics that's in that. But if I look at the buyers that I'm representing and say, hey, here's what they're paying. Here's what the difference is between what I've been offered, what we discussed previously. Do you want to go see the house? And then you show it. And if they like it, you write an offer. You have an agreement. And so that's the simplest way to do it. There's a whole bunch. I mean, great job by the North Carolina Association of Realtors. NC Realtors put out a new form that's basically a written version of oral buyer agency agreement that we've had for years from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. So we now have an exclusive right to represent the buyer, which means that we're getting married and you can't go to anybody else. We have Form 203, which is a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, which means I'm going to show you houses, but you can go work with anybody else too. And whoever you buy from, that's who you're going to pay. And then we've got this showing form that allows me just to cross the threshold and to have some kind of agreement that we can go to. We've got all the paperwork that we need. I mean, it's the real estate business. There's a piece of paper for everything.
There sure is.
And especially when you're dealing with a real estate transaction, and it's affecting residential, it's affecting property management, it's representing affecting tenants representation, and it's affecting the commercial business too. We're getting more and more in the residential business. We're adapting more and more to doing what they do in the commercial business these days, which is good. The only difference is commercial brokers typically have an attorney in the building to write the offer and put the compensation in. We can't do that into a pre-printed offer to purchase and contract form because it's a violation of NC statutes and Rule 58A 112B, I think it is, that doesn't allow us to talk about compensation in the contract. So that's a challenge. Now, people from other states, they can put compensation in their contract, so it's not as big of a deal. But the good thing is that everybody in the country is now operating in a similar manner where there's a written agreement. We're still there are still some things that North Carolina does that's different from other states in the country, with everything from reporting how we report square footage to the difference between buyer representation versus transactional brokerage, where the broker doesn't represent anybody. They're just there to fill out the paperwork and monitor the transaction, and help you do inspections and things like that. That's all they do. They don't actually represent the seller or the buyer. So folks coming to the state of North Carolina from out of the state are going to have a little bit of a different experience than anybody else.
Not to mention due diligence and the way that is in the state.
Well, the due diligence is a great example. I mean, back in the 2000s, we had for older agents in here listening, Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. You want to talk about headaches. But people had to decide, do you want to go with the seller having to do certain repairs, but risking that they may not do the others? Or do you want to put up money so you can negotiate everything? And everybody said, oh, nobody will ever put up non-refundable money. Well, 4 years ago during COVID, we were seeing $250,000 non-refundable due diligence fee with no inspection period. Yep. So the market adapts. The market adapts.
Yeah, obviously with more and more buyers and less properties, right? That just changed everything, right? The
Absolutely.
Supply and demand just changed.
Well, and blessed are the flexible. Yeah. You think back to 2015. Anybody remember TRID? I used to joke with you that TRID stood for the reason I drink, because there were so many new changes. Only in the real estate business. business, can we take existing acronyms and make another acronym out of it? And so you had TRID in 2015. You had a big boom of selling real estate in 2018 and 19 with interest rates that were very aggressive. And then you had COVID when the Fed went to a 0% interest rate and everybody started buying. Prices went up 18% here in the Triangle market for 2 years. And now people are complaining because prices went up 18%.
That's right.
You reap what you sow.
So as we wrap this up, and I'm so grateful for your time, what I would love to get is your thoughts on, and you and I have had several conversations on your YouTube channel, but love to get your thoughts on kind of what you see in the Triangle market specifically for not necessarily interest rates, because I don't know that there's any predicting that. I mean, you can, but who knows?
I don't have that crystal ball. It broke.
But as far as what you see happening in the supply and demand section here in North Carolina, I feel like there's a window. I don't know how big that window is, but I feel like right now there's a window for buyers to negotiate great deals on properties, because we're seeing I know you always know the numbers, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 days on market. Is that right?
Yep.
Which in reality, you and I both know that's not bad. It seems horrible when people are used to selling houses in the weekend, right?
Yes.
But 60 days is normal. Yeah. It's really a normal. But sellers still feel like that's a long time too. So they're willing to negotiate now where they may not have in a market back in 15 or 16. And so would love to know what your thoughts are, and what you see coming this spring, and maybe throughout the year next year in 2025.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's very important to know that the month of November of this year in 2024, we are above pre-pandemic active listing levels. We are the 55th of the top 200 markets that has entered that zone. So 1/4 of the real estate market in the top 200 cities is now back to or above pre-pandemic levels.
So that meaning we have more houses on the market.
We had 7,900 active listings in November of 2019, and today we have 8,200.
Okay.
So there are more choices for the buyer. Now, granted, interest rates are 2.5% to 3% higher, because you're probably at a 6 3/4 handle today, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. Depending on what you do. So you've got more choices. I think the biggest thing that people need to learn is, for 25, 30 years, I told people 6 months is a balanced market for a house to be on the market. It should take 180 days to sell your home. I think the balanced market is a 3 to 4 month market now.
Okay.
So we are seeing buyers having more. It is more of a buyer's market than it has been in 15 years. Last time we saw any semblance of a buyer's market was 2010, after the Great Recession, when prices had dropped. We were very lucky. We only dropped about 18-19% here in the Triangle as a whole. But I think that's an important piece to look at. But the other part of that is, we are pricing the entry-level homes out of range for people. We are at a point where inside the city limits of Raleigh, $450,000 is now entry level. Well, in order to be able to buy a $450,000 house, you got to have a household that makes about $140,000 a year. And when you look at the state population, you see that the median income for a household in the state of North Carolina is only about $63,000. I know that the FHFA guidelines came out this week, and they're going up again on the maximum loan amounts. And I'll leave those numbers to you, but they've gone up by about another 6-7%.
I think it's I saw an email or just earlier today. I think it's somewhere. They'll hold me this, like 806,250.
Exactly.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're talking about a program that now allows for you to buy an $800,000 house.
Not even an $800,000 house. That's a mortgage.
That's the mortgage.
That's right.
And with 20% down, you're talking about $1 million buy. So that's going to be hard for, when we talk about affordable housing, people, the first thing I ask is, tell me what you mean by affordable. Because if you think we're going to have $67,000 townhouses again sometime, it's just not going to happen.
Well, you can't find a $200,000 townhouse.
You can't find a piece of land for a town.
Yeah.
It takes $85,000 to develop that 3/100ths of an acre for a townhouse right now, when you look at the numbers. So that's just not, in the words of Mr. Spock, that's just not logical, Captain. So you've got that to deal with. You have municipalities that are, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Chicago, are all working on taking old office buildings in their urban downtown centers and turning those into residential
Condos,
units.
yep.
One of the best examples is a project in Washington, D.C. that's the old Peace Corps building. They've taken that building, they've added they've created 163 residential units. They have a health club inside of it. They have a swimming pool on the exterior of the roof. They have a yoga studio. They have a restaurant. They have a convenience store. So if you're work from home in Washington, D.C., you can live in this place and not have to leave it. It is 70% rented, and only 4 of the residents have cars.
Wow.
So it's fully walkable. You've got Chicago that's redoing the area that's right next to the river. They've got some buildings there. Philadelphia doing some city center stuff with focusing on both residential and tourism. They're literally building 234 units to be Airbnb style rentals to get tourism into the downtown area of Philly. So you're seeing that. You're seeing it here. There's a project in Durham right now that a guy has bought an old hotel in downtown Durham, and he's turning it into $800 a month apartments, basically. Now, there's no kitchen in them, so you're going to have to eat out. But if you want a living quarters, you can live with 2 to 3 people in one of these fairly comfortably for $800 a month.
Wow.
Those are the challenges that we're facing, because and people always say, well, so you're saying that prices are going to come down. I never said that.
No.
Prices aren't coming down. I just don't see that happening. It would take something very unusual. If you look back over the last 50 years, prices have gone down in 4 years. And the worst one was 2007 and 8, when we went down by about 12%. Other than that, all of the other reductions during recessions have been less than 2%.
Yep.
So the odds of the price going down for that house you're going to buy is not there. If you told me a year ago this month that you wanted to wait and see what interest rates did, yes, you've saved 1% on your interest rate. But in the meantime, the house that you wanted to buy has gone up by 4.5%. That negates that.
That's right.
And so the best thing you can do, if you want to buy, it's time to buy. And people say, well, Brian, you say that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yes, because if you'd have said
the only better time to buy was some other time in the past.
The only better time to buy was 10 or 15 years ago. And so you've got to balance that. Ultimately, I think that people are going to get used to 6.5% to 7% interest rates. I know that most of our indices that I look at with their predictions on interest rates are no longer talking about sub 6 next year. So
Housing Wire came out yesterday with something that showed that they're going to be somewhere in the mid 6s to low
6.4 to 6.8. That's Logan Matashami. He's a great follow on Twitter, and I follow Logan. Logan's a guy. Logan's a fiery little fella. If you argue with him, he'll tell you why he thinks you're an idiot. But he's got some great information, and that's a great follow. I do a lot of my quotes on information on my Facebook page that I have with my students that share it there. But yeah, I think that we're in a point where people are going to have to get used to 6 handles, and they're going to have to make a decision. And of course, I get very frustrated when people say, yeah, I've got only a 2.8% mortgage rate. That's great, but you have $35,000 worth of credit card debt where you're paying 24% on. That's not a balance.
That's right. Yeah, I think everybody's situation is different.
Sure.
Is it the right time to buy? It depends on your needs,
sure.
right? At the same time, if you do not own a home and you plan on being in this area for any period of time, more than a couple of years,
if you're going to be more than 2.5 years in a place, you need to buy.
You need to buy a house. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's important to note that, especially for younger listeners to this, get into something. because the difference in net worth over a 7-year period for a homeowner versus a renter is a difference of 42 times right now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And it just came as a matter. I can't remember who put out the statistic, but it's gone from 40 times in 2019 to 42 times for the homeowner because we've seen the significant run-ups. You know, all you have to do is listen to people complain about their tax bill and their tax valuations to find out how much prices have gone up in the area. And I'm sorry, this is North Carolina. You know, we're expected, we have about 9 million people in North Carolina right now. We're expected to have 11 million by 2040. That's 15 years from now. Game on.
Yeah, it's more houses.
You know, 2,000 people coming to town.
They can only build them so fast.
Yeah, and you know, you've had rental rates that have gone down a little bit because we added 24,000 rental units to Wake County in the last 2 years, but they can't build them fast enough.
Yeah.
You know, 67 people a day moving to Wake County. There's not enough room to hold them.
Yeah. If you're thinking about buying a house and you haven't bought one, you don't own one, you should absolutely look to do that sooner rather than later. If you are a real estate agent and you're in North Carolina, I strongly encourage you to check out Brian. Brian, what's your website?
Website for the classes is brianpateseminars.com. If you want to go look for BP8 Realty on Linktree, you can find YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Twitter account, and all of that. If you're a former student, you can always go to Facebook and look at Brian Pate Seminars on Facebook and check that out. And you can visit the YouTube channel, Brian Pate Realtor, that's out there.
Thank you. Brian is an incredible educator, but he's a lot of fun. Everybody that goes to his classes enjoys them, so I'd encourage you to check him out for that. Of course, if you are a mortgage lender or a real estate agent or just an entrepreneur that has enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'd certainly love for you to message us. If you have other ideas for podcasts, be sure to message me on any of our social medias as well. All that information is below. Thank you so much for your time. Brian, I really appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to spend time with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, buddy.